The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.
And thank you for joining us here today on Market Talk as we broadcast live once again from Commodity Classic in Houston, Texas, with our friends at the National Corn Growers Association. Wrapping up Commodity Classic on a Friday, and we got a great show lined up for you here today as we're going to be focusing in on sustainable aviation fuel. We did get some news on that front from Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack on Friday morning here at Commodity Classic during the general session, as they said that they're going to be pushing the decision on the GREET model down the road a few weeks. So we're waiting for some final decisions there, and so that's something we're going to watch. But in the meantime, here today on the show, we're going to learn more about the benefits that could come from sustainable aviation fuel here and how it could benefit the corn industry and more. So that is going to be the focus of our program today. We're also going to talk markets later in the show. Ted Seifert with Zaner AgHedge is going to slide in here and join us for a conversation. Right now, joining me, though, on the program, first here with me in Houston, Sarah McKay with the National Corn Growers Association. Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
And also joining us on a remote location, she couldn't make it here to Houston, Texas, Krista Swanson with the National Corn Growers Association is with us as well. Krista, thanks for being with us here today on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, let's just start a brief overview of sustainable aviation fuel and recent, increased interest by corporate airlines and the public. There's a lot of talk, a lot of excitement around SAF. So maybe Sarah, go ahead and start and kind of give us that 1,000-foot view of where we're at right now.
Sure thing. So when we talk about SAF, that's Sustainable Aviation Fuel. So another acronym to add to the alphabet soup there. But when we talk about sustainable aviation fuel for agriculture, there's a lot of different pathways that we can pursue to make aviation fuel in that sector more sustainable and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and their contribution to the environment. And so we at National Corn Growers are excited about the opportunity for corn and corn ethanol to be used as one of the many pathways to achieve sustainable aviation fuel. It's one of those where it's another huge market opportunity for us when we look at our new uses portfolio. Obviously, traditionally, our demand portfolio has been across ethanol and the fuel sector, as well as our animal agriculture partners continue to remain our top consumers of corn. And then you have, of course, trade and industrial uses. So all those are incredibly important, but we're always trying to grind more corn and get and take advantage of getting that pile whittled down. And our growers are becoming more and more efficient at what they do and producing more with less. And that will help these airlines meet their goals when it comes to sustainable aviation fuel. And we want to be part of that solution.
Definitely. Well, and I think, Krista, as well, just where corn is positioned and corn ethanol right now to be competitive when meeting some of these goals and demands of what's in front of us for SAF, I feel like corn's in a very good spot right now. Can you talk about that from an economist standpoint?
Yeah, so corn is definitely positioned to be able to meet the demands of those goals set for sustainable aviation fuel. I mean, first of all, we have an abundance of corn. Sarah was really just touching on this when we think about the ability of our farmers to continuously produce more with less. We just came off of 2023 with a record production, and we have, plenty of ending stocks available right now as we head into next year. And the outlook for the 24 crop is that we can continue to have that ability to meet that need. Also, corn is an affordable feedstock for sustainable aviation fuel. Currently, the average corn price for corn for 2023 is estimated to be at $4.80. The average price for 2024 is $4.40. And we think about where that compares with where corn was a couple of years ago. That's certainly makes it affordable at this point in time. And again, abundant and affordable. I'll also note that corn, we can produce corn sustainably, and corn has the ability to be, sequester carbon from the atmosphere and responsibly store it back in the earth. So we have all these components making corn well positioned.
Well, and I know too a lot of things that NCGA is working on in this arena. I know we're going to be talking about that throughout the show. I mean, Sarah, you guys have really kind of taken a proactive approach here. I feel like to getting the corn industry set up for its role in SAF.
Yeah, we really want to position corn and specifically corn ethanol as that feedstock of choice, something that's commercially available, abundant. Krista touched on it, abundant, affordable, sustainable. That's also important when it comes to these feedstocks that need to be able to scale up quickly and meet these huge demands. The grand challenge, the grand aviation challenge that the White House put out, they're requesting 3 billion, 3 billion gallons of SAF per year by 2030. And that's a huge demand opportunity. And, if the right policy is set up and if we get the GREET model right, and if we get the infrastructure in place and the carbon intensity scores, where we can help achieve those goals, there's a huge market opportunity there. We just need all the components to get into place.
Definitely. Well, and Krista, you were kind of talking about this as well, just with some of the different factors on the economics of this. Obviously, you have to think if we can get situated in the right place at the end of the day, that's just going to be better for the producers' bottom line with better average prices on the commodity side, on the futures board, things like that. There's just a lot of opportunity in front of us, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's something that the farmers in desperate need of right now as well. I mean, as we think about the cost side of things for the farmer, I talked about those where prices are at for farmers right now, but those prices are below the average cost of production. And so certainly, a new demand source of this nature would be really important for the farmers and really critical at the farm level.
Well, and of course, that demand is very, very important, and finding some of those new uses. And Sarah, we've talked about this a lot, that economic sustainability of corn. That's what a lot of this is about, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's, one of the realities that we try to make sure the aviation industry and the airlines that we're partnering with and working with, that they understand that, corn and specifically corn ethanol and that alcohol to jet pathway, Soyuz already has a lot of great progress in this space. And there's other efforts in the SAF area, but, leveraging what's commercially available now will help them achieve their goals sooner and provide that economic sustainability in addition to the environmental sustainability across the board.
Definitely. Well, we're going to talk more. I know we want to look at some of the, the existing infrastructure that's out there. How can we produce SAF on a larger scale? We want to talk more about the demand side of the equation here, and we're going to continue that conversation coming up after the break as we continue here on Market Talk. We are talking today with Sarah McKay and Krista Swanson with the National Corn Growers Association. We are live at Commodity Classic in Houston, Texas, in the NCGA booth on the third floor of the trade show, 7405. We'll be back with more here on Market Talk on the way right after the break. And welcome back to Market Talk from Commodity Classic in Houston, Texas. We are talking sustainable aviation fuel with the National Corn Growers Association. Sarah McKay, Krista Swanson with us here today on the show. And Sarah, let's talk about, kind of set this up. I know there's a few different pathways here to get to some of these goals that are out there from the administration when it comes to SAF. So talk about that a little bit for us if you can.
Sure. There are various different pathways, when we talk about getting to SAF or sustainable aviation fuel. You can leverage the oil pathway. You can leverage the alcohol to jet pathway, which is the one that we're most excited about from a corn perspective, because we can leverage existing infrastructure in the ethanol space to achieve this and utilize corn and corn ethanol for that process. There are other pathways as well. And as we've been working with the different airlines, and I'm sure growers listening are familiar too with some of the headlines on Southwest partnering with Sapphire on some of their cellulosic work. They most recently introduced a partnership with LanzaJet that's using methane from landfills and going that route. So there's all these different pathways. And I think that's the beauty of SAF, is that it isn't going to take just one pathway or one feedstock to achieve it. It's going to take a lot of different feedstocks from the agricultural sector to make this happen. So it's not one feedstock necessarily competing against another. What we try to hone in on is the importance of utilizing what's commercially available now, i.e. corn ethanol is one of those pathways moving forward.
And it's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats,
Exactly.
so to speak, here in agriculture. Well, and Krista, I think that speaks to, some of those demand pieces of the puzzle here and creating that new demand for not just corn, to Sarah's point, but all of our different commodities here and all the different pathways that we have for sustainable aviation fuel. I mean, I think some of that diversification, you could talk about that, is pretty important, especially as some of our traditional trade partners and dynamics kind of shift around here in recent years, right?
Yeah, there's really been a lot of shifting in demand and some of our traditional trade partners really going back to about 2017. A lot of changes every year in that time since the initial trade war of that time. And I think it really highlights the importance of, I guess another point for corn specifically is in that time we've continued to see Brazil grow and become, a bigger competitor in the world market in terms of corn, and they already are for soybeans. And it just really shows the importance of having diversified demand, different demand sources, and some of that, if we can have more demand domestically and using ethanol to jet and corn in that pathway to sustainable aviation fuel, then that's better for our industry. It's better for the other commodities as well.
Definitely. Well, and thinking about from an infrastructure standpoint, let's talk about some of that here in the U.S. Like, what are some of the current infrastructure pieces that we can use to help us to achieve some of these SAF goals?
Really leveraging, what the infrastructure that already exists in the ethanol space will be one way. There will need to be additional infrastructure, built to meet that capacity. And, one of our partners we work with in the space is the Airlines for America, and they estimate about a 98% compound annual growth rate from the current SAF volume to meet the actual needs for that grand challenge 3 billion gallon goal.
Definitely. And I think about some of the different, infrastructure things we have out there too. Krista, I mean, from we've seen some of the challenges with trading partners right now in terms of, the issues with wars and problems there and low water levels and things like that. But, here at home, getting corn to where it needs to be for some of these different, sustainable aviation fuel plants, et cetera. I think rail, truck, our waterway system, from that perspective, we have a lot of that traditional infrastructure already in place, don't we?
Yeah, there's a lot of infrastructure already in place. And like Sarah mentioned, we already have ethanol, a very expansive ethanol infrastructure. And if we can, take advantage of that ethanol to jet pathway. I mean, the other important point here is that the ethanol industry is already not running at full capacity at this time. So we can take advantage of that idled infrastructure and we can ramp up production at in those ethanol plants that are already there to meet the goals of 2030 and beyond. And on that note, we also have, Sarah talked about the importance of diversified feedstocks to meet SAF demand, and certainly going forward, that's going to be important. But when I look at that 2030 goal of 3 billion gallons and back into how much corn would it take to meet that if we could do that today? And that comes out to about 1.6 billion bushels of corn. And as a reminder, we have an estimated carry out this year of over 2 billion bushels. And so when we think about that, we have the corn, we have the ethanol infrastructure, and so it's just really important that we have policy that supports this to make these goals happen.
Well, and I think too, part of it's going to come down to that food versus fuel debate too, that we've kind of seen and heard here throughout agriculture. And I know that's something that's right in here in the SAF conversation, isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, it's surprising, I guess not surprising, but still surprising by how much that whole food versus fuel debate still exists in the industry, when it comes to the sustainability industry and folks that are trying to take advantage of these new uses. But we have a lot of great a lot of years of great data, we can show, no, this concern has not come to fruition. As Krista said, that we continue to have carry out every year, and because of the fractionation processes to separate that corn kernel efficiently, we're not creating these new uses at by sacrificing other industries. We can feed cattle, we can feed pigs, we can feed humans, we can export, we can fuel vehicles, we can fuel airplanes now, we can still do the plastics. It gets to be an and statement. It doesn't mean that we have to compete. So I think that's really exciting. But yeah, we have a lot of data we try to share to dismiss and demystify that whole food versus feed.
Yeah, well, and Krista, to your point about ending stocks, and we have the amount of corn we need to meet the 2030 goal right now, but I also wonder too, do we need to still try and plant a little bit more potentially to ease that debate of food versus fuel? What do you think about that?
Not necessarily. If you look at, I know that's been a concern too, is are we going to need more acres to meet these goals? If we look out, yield has been increasing over time. Farmers are producing more with less. Even last year where we had over 94 million corn acres, the highest in some time. If we look back at the 1930s, we planted more corn acres then. So we are continuing, but we have, multiples in terms of production. We look ahead, I think we can have corn acres, and like Sarah talked about, this isn't just a corn story. We have other commodities playing into this as well, but don't necessarily have to increase, and we can still continue to produce more into the future because of those yield gains and those improvements that we see that help us to continue to increase productivity.
And I know too, not just corn itself, but corn stover is another piece of the puzzle that could be a feedstock here, right?
Absolutely. That's something that, again, it's one piece of the puzzle. The volumes and the efficiencies in that space haven't been as clearly identified as something like corn ethanol. And we know that there has been investment, of course, in corn stover and utilizing that pathway, but the technology is a lot more difficult. And obviously the infrastructure, the storage, the hauling, there are a lot of other, associated costs, and even the sustainability factor isn't quite hashed out all the way. So again, we really try to promote corn grain to ethanol as that pathway, or sorry, corn grain to ethanol to alcohol to jet as that pathway. Yeah,
Krista, any final thoughts from you on that in terms of just some of the different pieces of the puzzle here from your economist standpoint, real quick? Is there anything else you'd want to add to kind of wrap up this segment?
I guess since Sarah was talking about corn stover, and maybe that is a pathway for the future, but like Sarah pointed out, we already have pathways in place when we talk about grain to ethanol to jet. And when you think about some of the economics of corn stover and just logistics of that starts to get really complicated and really expensive really fast. And so while from the maybe a sustainability point of view, that seems like a good solution, when we start calculating that out, it doesn't pencil out as easily either. So that's another point to make.
Okay. All right. So some different pieces of the puzzle, like I said, some different things to look at here. But, again, I think I bring it back home to a lot of positivity in front of us here, a lot of opportunity for SAF for sure. And we're going to talk more about this coming up later in the program. We're going to continue our conversation with Sarah McKay and Krista Swanson from the National Corn Growers Association. Up next, I know Krista's going to stay with us. Ted Seifert from Zaner Ag Hedge is going to slide in, and we are going to talk markets. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about the corn market and where that's sitting after ending its run higher this week. So we are going to take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk markets here on Market Talk, live from Commodity Classic, on the way right after this. And continuing our program here with the National Corn Growers Association at Commodity Classic in Houston, Texas. Jesse Allen back with you here at Market Talk. Sarah McKay rejoins us with the National Corn Growers Association. Krista Swanson remains with us as well here as we are getting back to our SAF conversation and kind of wrapping things up here when talking sustainable aviation fuel. And let's talk just kind of from a policy outlook and some of the barriers and what do we need to do here, Sarah? Kind of talk about that. I mentioned at the beginning of the show with just, we're waiting on the decision here on the GREET model and things like that. So, what are some of the things that are in front of us here to really advance corn ethanol for sustainable aviation fuel?
Yeah, so when we think about some of the barriers to making sustainable aviation fuel from corn a reality is in the policy sector, which we'll talk about first, then we'll jump into the sustainability stuff, and then really that industry engagement around and advocacy and education, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on the policy side, as you mentioned earlier, around the GREET model and the announcement around decision and further information on that, it's really important that we get that GREET model right, and that we get that consistent and accurate accounting methodology, because that's going to be really important for corn ethanol specifically and our other ag feedstocks to really to qualify and meet those goals. On the sustainability side, of course, we're working to make sure that our growers can demonstrate their continued reduction in their carbon intensity scores, because you have to meet that 50% reduction target that's required for SAF, and being able to demonstrate that will be really important and even exceed that goal.
Yeah. And too, I think as well, with the education side, I think just making sure that everyone knows and understands the potential that's out there, and advocating for that potential is, to your point earlier, it's kind of the other piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah, and I think there'll need to be, a lot of progress, continued to be made, and also communicated about the progress to date on farm, but also a lot of investment on the infrastructure, and even at the facility side, when they're producing the ethanol that then goes into sustainable aviation fuel and the SAF itself. There's going to need so not only the adoption of those on-farm practices, but also investment in additional technology to help lower the CI score of corn ethanol.
Yeah, and Krista, kind of what we were talking about earlier, just that, like, I love the term, the economic sustainability, not only the environmental sustainability aspect of what our corn growers are doing here to reach some of these SAF goals, but just the economics of it. I mean, talk about that as kind of some final thoughts as we are really looking at that aspect of, what potential we have here with SAF. I mean, what do corn farmers really need to think about and consider here when it comes to the economics of this?
Well, there's kind of two sides of this, I would say. So first of all, there's the side we've talked a lot throughout this whole show today about the importance of diversified demand. And so when we have a potential demand source like this, and we think about what that can mean in terms of the markets, and we've also talked about where prices are right now, and that improved demand and certainly a new demand source like this could help improve prices for farmers. The other side of this is that Sarah was just talking about those carbon intensity scores, and what is needed to meet the thresholds that are set for some of the incentives. Farmers, we're already seeing programs that work with farmers to calculate your farm level carbon intensity score. And, there's going to be opportunities too, I believe, for farmers to be able to, capture maybe an extra premium for that. So I think there's definitely economics that support this and provide some new opportunities and better prices for farmers.
Well, I think too, Krista, thinking about just, the farm economy and where things are, and, still good numbers, even though we're maybe off of some of the, the recent record numbers we've had, but thinking about the farm gates and really, for corn farmers specifically, just everything that goes into this, feeding and fueling our world. Again, there's just a lot of opportunity if we really are smart about things and do what needs to be done, right?
For sure. Definitely a lot of opportunity. Corn farmers, they want to plant corn, and we reiterate this point again. We continually produce more with less. There are opportunities out there, and we just need the right policy environment to continue to support that.
Sarah, final thoughts from you as well here as we kind of wrap up this whole conversation on SAF. I mean, what do you really want folks to kind of take home, the things that NCGA are doing to advocate for corn as a feedstock for sustainable aviation fuel, et cetera? What would you really drive home to folks?
I'll just add in some color around, what we're doing on really that advocacy and engagement with the industry and that piece. We've developed a lot of good relationships with the various airlines, both that serve domestically and internationally, because SAF is going to be used in a variety of markets. And that's something that helping those folks in the aviation fuel supply chain understand what's happening on your farm and the work that you're doing to continue with the sustainability efforts, but also to make that commercially available corn ethanol to jet out, that corn ethanol to jet as a realistic pathway is really important. So that's a lot of the work that we're doing, across the sustainability policy and the advocacy side. That's really important to make this a reality. And I would just add, to Krista's earlier, point about the importance of diversified markets. This is SAF is just one of the many new uses that we're chasing after, and really, it's the silver buckshot approach that we kind of say it's not necessarily going to be a silver bullet. It's all this variety of uses, whether it's bio-based plastics, continued demand with our traditional demand customers, but also really finding that new and novel use for corn and SAF and beyond is a lot of the ways that we're leveraging checkoff dollars to make that happen.
A lot of opportunity when it comes to sustainable aviation fuel. Really appreciate the discussion. Krista, thanks for joining us remotely, and wish you could have been here with us in Houston, but appreciate you being on the show with us today. Thanks so much.
Yep, thank you.
And Sarah, thank you as well for joining me here, keeping me company in Houston today. Always good to catch up with you and talk about corn. Appreciate
Always a
it.
pleasure. Thank you.
Sarah McKay and Krista Swanson with the National Corn Growers Association. We're out of time here on Market Talk at Commodity Classic, wrapping up another Commodity Classic, this time in Houston, Texas. And we appreciate you joining us for the conversation. I'm Jesse Allen. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for listening to Market Talk.